I am Natalie Westbrook, 29 years old, and 3 weeks ago I checked my savings account after our annual family reunion in Pinehaven to find that $47,000 had been completely drained. When I confronted my father about the missing money, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "We needed it." Then yesterday, my bank manager called me with security footage that revealed a truth so devastating it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Let us know in the comments where you're watching. If this resonated, don't miss out on subscribing because tomorrow I'm sharing something that will completely change how you think about this topic. My name is Natalie Westbrook, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed my family was built on honesty, hard work, and mutual respect. I'm a 29-year-old nurse practitioner working at Riverside Medical Center in downtown Millbrook, and I've been saving every spare dollar for the past 6 years to buy my first home. That $47,000 represented countless double shifts, skipped vacations, and careful budgeting. It was my future, my independence, and my ticket to finally building the life I'd always dreamed of. I grew up in the small town of Pinehaven, about 2 hours north of where I work now. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone, where handshake deals still mean something, and where family reputation matters more than money. My father, Gerald Westbrook, has been the town's only electrician for over 30 years. He's the kind of man who would drop everything to help a neighbor fix their wiring, often refusing payment from elderly residents or struggling families. "Community takes care of community," he would always say. And I believed that principle defined our family. My mother, Dorothy, passed away when I was 15 after a long battle with cancer. Those final months watching her fight while Dad worked extra jobs to pay medical bills not covered by insurance taught me the value of financial security. "Never depend on anyone else for your survival, sweetheart," she whispered to me during one of her last hospital stays. "Save your money, be smart with it, and always have enough put away so you never have to beg for help." That advice shaped everything about how I approached money. While my friends in nursing school were living paycheck to paycheck, going out every weekend, and accumulating credit card debt, I was working extra shifts and depositing every possible dollar into my savings account at Millbrook Community Bank. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, lived in the cheapest apartment I could find, and bought generic brands at the grocery store. My colleagues thought I was crazy, but I had a plan. The plan was simple. Save $50,000 for a down payment on a modest house in a good neighborhood, something with a small yard where I could plant a garden like the one Mom used to tend. I wanted stability, a place where I could eventually raise a family of my own, somewhere that would be mine no matter what life threw at me. After 6 years of disciplined saving, I was finally close to my goal. Every month, I would drive up to Pinehaven to visit Dad and check on our old family house. The place needed work. The roof had been patched multiple times, the kitchen appliances were older than I was, and the heating system struggled through each winter. But Dad was proud and stubborn, always insisting he could handle any repairs himself. "I've been fixing things longer than you've been alive, Natty," he would say, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "Don't worry about your old man." Our annual family reunion had always been a highlight of my year. Every summer, Dad would organize a gathering for our extended family at Lakeshore Park in Pinehaven. Cousins would drive in from neighboring states, aunts and uncles would bring their famous dishes, and we would spend the weekend touching up, playing games, and reinforcing the family bonds that had held us together through good times and bad. This year's reunion felt different from the moment I arrived. Dad seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and having hushed conversations with my Uncle Raymond and Aunt Priscilla. When I asked if everything was okay, he brushed off my concerns with his usual "nothing your old man can't handle" response. But I noticed his worry lines around his eyes had deepened, and he wasn't his usual jovial self during the family barbecue. My cousin Bethany, Uncle Raymond's daughter, seemed unusually interested in my work and living situation. "So you're still saving up for that house?" she asked while we were helping clean up after dinner. "Dad mentioned you're really close to having enough for a down payment. That's so smart of you." At the time, I was proud to share that I was almost at my goal, happy that my financial discipline was being recognized by family members. Looking back now, I realize that conversation was the beginning of the end. Bethany's questions weren't admiration. They were reconnaissance. She wanted to know exactly how much I had saved, which bank I used, and how close I was to making my purchase. I answered everything honestly because she was family, because I trusted her, because I never imagined that sharing my excitement about finally achieving my dream would lead to my worst nightmare.
The reunion weekend passed normally, otherwise. We played our traditional games of horseshoes and volleyball, shared stories about Mom, and made plans for next year's gathering. Dad seemed to relax as the weekend went on, and by Sunday evening, when everyone was packing up, he was back to his old self, hugging everyone goodbye and promising to stay in touch. I drove back to Millbrook that Sunday night, feeling grateful for my family and excited about the future. In just a few more months, I would have enough saved to start seriously house hunting. I had already been pre-approved for a mortgage and had been secretly browsing real estate listings online, imagining myself in different homes, planning which room would be my home office and where I would plant Mom's favorite roses. 2.5 weeks later, I was at the hospital, finishing up a particularly challenging shift in the ICU, when I decided to check my banking app to see how close I was to my $50,000 goal. I had just received my paycheck and was excited to see the numbers creep higher toward my target. What I saw on my phone screen made me think the app was malfunctioning. My savings account, which should have shown a balance of around $47,000, displayed zero. I refreshed the app 3 times, logged out and back in, even deleted and reinstalled the app, thinking there must be a technical error. But the numbers didn't change. My life savings, 6 years of sacrifice, planning, and dreams, had simply vanished. The account history showed a single withdrawal 3 days earlier for the entire balance, $47,247.83. The transaction was marked as an in-person withdrawal at the Pinehaven branch of Millbrook Community Bank, the same branch where I had opened the account when I first started working. I couldn't breathe. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, staring at my phone screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could someone withdraw that much money from my account? I was the only person with access. I had never given anyone my PIN, never shared my login information, never even told anyone my exact account balance, except for the conversation with Bethany at the family reunion. My hands were shaking as I called the bank's customer service line. After being transferred 3 times and placed on hold for what felt like hours, I finally reached someone who could access my account details. Ms. Westbrook, I show a withdrawal was made on Tuesday at 2:47 p.m. at our Pinehaven location. The withdrawal was processed using proper identification and account verification procedures. But I wasn't in Pinehaven on Tuesday. I was working here in Millbrook. Someone stole my money. I understand your concern, Ms. Westbrook. You'll need to file a fraud report with our security department and potentially with local law enforcement. I'm noting your account for investigation, but I should mention that the withdrawal was made by someone who knew your account number, social security number, and answered all security questions correctly. The implications of what she was saying hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a random theft or a case of stolen mail. Someone with intimate knowledge of my personal information had deliberately targeted my life savings. Someone who knew exactly how much money I had and exactly which bank I used. Someone in my family had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. I drove straight to Pinehaven that night, my mind racing with possibilities and hoping against hope that there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that could make this nightmare make sense. Maybe Dad had noticed suspicious activity and moved my money for safekeeping. Maybe there was a family emergency I didn't know about, and someone had borrowed the money with plans to pay it back. But deep down, I already knew the truth was going to be much worse than anything I was imagining. The next revelation would change everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most. If you're loving what you're hearing, smash that subscribe button. It really keeps us going. All right, let's jump back in. The 2-hour drive from Millbrook to Pinehaven never felt longer. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white, and I kept replaying the customer service representative's words. Someone who knew your account number, social security number, and answered all security questions correctly. The list of people with access to that information was devastatingly short. As I drove through the familiar countryside, passing the old Miller farm and the weathered billboard advertising Pinehaven's annual corn festival, I tried to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Dad had discovered fraudulent activity and moved my money to protect it. Maybe there was a family emergency I didn't know about. Maybe Uncle Raymond had gotten into financial trouble and Dad had helped him out with plans to pay me back. But the timing was too convenient. 3 days after the family reunion where I had openly discussed my savings with Bethany, my entire account was emptied at the Pinehaven branch, the branch where Dad had taken me to open that very account when I first started working.
To understand how devastating this betrayal felt, you need to understand what the Westbrook name meant in Pinehaven. We weren't wealthy, but we were respected. For 3 generations, Westbrook men had been the backbone of this community's infrastructure. My great-grandfather, Thomas Westbrook, had arrived in Pinehaven in 1952 with an electrical license and a toolbox. He wired the first traffic light, installed the electrical systems in the new elementary school, and helped modernize the Main Street businesses when the town was trying to attract visitors from the nearby lake. Everyone knew that if you needed electrical work done right the first time, you called a Westbrook. My grandfather, Harold Westbrook, took over the business in the 1970s and expanded it throughout the county. He was the one who wired the new hospital wing, the high school gymnasium, and dozens of residential developments as Pinehaven slowly grew from a farming community into a small tourist destination. Harold was known for his integrity. He never cut corners, never overcharged, and never left a job unfinished. When Dad inherited the business in 1995, he continued that tradition. Gerald Westbrook was the guy who would drive out at midnight during a storm to restore power to the senior center. He was the one who taught electrical basics at the community college for free because he believed everyone should understand their home's wiring. He was the man who, after Mom's cancer diagnosis, somehow managed to work enough extra jobs to keep us financially stable while still being present for every doctor's appointment and treatment. The Westbrook electric van was a fixture around town. Kids would wave when they saw Dad driving to job sites, and elderly residents would flag him down on the street to ask quick questions about their outlets or ceiling fans. He never charged for advice, often saying, "Knowledge doesn't cost anything to share." This was the man who had raised me to value honesty above all else. When I was 8 and accidentally broke Mrs. Henderson's garden gnome while playing in her yard, Dad marched me to her front door and stood beside me while I confessed and offered to pay for a replacement with my allowance money. "The truth might hurt for a moment," he told me afterward, "but a lie will hurt forever." My mother, Dorothy, had been the perfect complement to Dad's generous nature. Where he was inclined to help others even at his own expense, she was the practical one who made sure our family's needs were met first. She managed the household budget with military precision, clipping coupons, shopping sales, and always having a small emergency fund tucked away. "Your father has the biggest heart in Pinehaven," she would tell me while we sat at the kitchen table paying bills every month. "But big hearts don't always make smart financial decisions. That's why I handle the money, sweetheart. Someone has to make sure we can afford his generosity." Mom's approach to money wasn't greedy or selfish, it was protective. She had grown up during her parents' divorce, watching her mother struggle to make ends meet after her father left with most of their savings. That experience taught her that financial security wasn't about luxury, it was about survival and dignity. When the cancer diagnosis came, Mom's financial planning became even more crucial. The treatments were expensive, even with Dad's health insurance through the Electrical Workers Union.
She had to navigate insurance denials, appeal processes, and the complex world of medical billing while fighting for her life. During those long months, I watched her maintain a spreadsheet tracking every medical expense, every insurance payment, and every dollar that came in or went out. Even when the chemotherapy made her too weak to cook or clean, she insisted on reviewing the household finances every week. "Promise me something, Natalie," she said during one of our last conversations in the hospital. "Promise me you'll always have your own money, your own account, your own plan. Don't ever let anyone else control your financial future, not even someone you love. People change, circumstances change, but your independence is the one thing no one can take away from you unless you let them." That promise shaped every financial decision I made afterward. Even when I was dating Kevin during nursing school and we talked about moving in together, I insisted on keeping separate accounts. When he suggested I could save money by letting him handle our shared expenses, I declined. When friends thought I was being paranoid or overly cautious, I remembered Mom's words and stayed committed to my financial independence. The house fund wasn't just about having a place to live. It represented everything Mom had taught me about security and everything Dad had demonstrated about building something lasting. I wanted a home where I could plant the same varieties of roses Mom had grown in our garden, where I could host family dinners like the ones I remembered from childhood, where I could create the kind of stable, loving environment I had been blessed to grow up in. Every dollar that went into that savings account carried the weight of my parents' lessons. When I worked a double shift on Christmas Eve because the ICU was short-staffed, I thought about Mom's determination during her treatments. When I chose to pack lunch instead of buying food at the hospital cafeteria, I remembered Dad's early morning starts and late-night emergency calls. The account wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was 6 years of choosing financial responsibility over immediate gratification. It was saying no to vacations with friends so I could save their cost. It was driving my reliable but aging Honda instead of getting a car payment. It was living in a tiny apartment with thin walls and outdated appliances because every dollar I didn't spend on luxury could go toward my future. My colleagues at Riverside Medical often joked about my frugal lifestyle. "Live a little, Nat," they would say when I declined invitations to expensive restaurants or weekend getaways. "You can't take it with you." But they didn't understand that this wasn't about being cheap. It was about honoring the values my parents had instilled in me and building the foundation for the life I wanted to create. The Westbrook family gatherings had always been the highlight of my year, but they had also become more complex as our extended family's financial situations diverged. Dad's success with Westbrook Electric had made our immediate family relatively comfortable, while some of his siblings had struggled with various challenges over the years. Uncle Raymond, Dad's younger brother, had never quite found his footing professionally. He had bounced between jobs, construction, retail, even a brief stint trying to start his own landscaping business that failed after 2 seasons. His wife, my Aunt Priscilla, worked part-time at the local grocery store, but their income barely covered their basic expenses. Their daughter, Bethany, my cousin who was 3 years younger than me, had inherited her parents' financial instability along with an expensive taste for things they couldn't afford. She was constantly posting on social media about new clothes, makeup, and gadgets that seemed impossible on her part-time retail salary. Family gatherings often included subtle requests for loans that were never repaid and complaints about how unfair it was that some people had more opportunities than others. I had always felt sorry for Uncle Raymond's family and admired Dad's willingness to help them out when things got particularly tight. Over the years, I had watched him quietly pay for Bethany's car repairs, cover Uncle Raymond's mortgage payment during a stretch of unemployment, and even help with Aunt Priscilla's dental work when they couldn't afford insurance. "Family takes care of family," he would always say when I asked if he was worried about the money never being paid back. "We're blessed with more than we need, so we share with those who need more than they have." At the time, I thought his generosity was admirable. I respected the way he lived his values and put family loyalty above financial gain. I never questioned whether his help was actually helping or whether it might be enabling a pattern of poor financial decisions. Looking back now, I realize I should have paid more attention to the dynamics at family gatherings. I should have noticed how Bethany's questions about my savings weren't casual conversation, but careful intelligence gathering. I should have wondered why Uncle Raymond and Aunt Priscilla were always so interested in my work schedule, my apartment lease, and my banking habits. I should have recognized that Dad's generous spirit, combined with his siblings' financial desperation, had created a situation where my carefully saved money would eventually look like a solution to their problems rather than the foundation of my dreams. I called Dad from my car before I reached Pinehaven, hoping to prepare him for the conversation we needed to have. My hands were shaking as I dialed his familiar number, the same landline he had maintained since I was a child because cell service gets spotty during storms and people need to be able to reach an electrician. "Westbrook residence," he answered in his usual cheerful tone. "Dad, it's me. I am driving up to see you tonight. We need to talk about something important." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Everything okay, Natty? It's pretty late for a drive." "No, Dad. Everything is not okay. Someone withdrew all the money from my savings account, and I need to figure out what happened." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the television in the background, the same evening news program he watched every night, but Dad didn't respond. "Dad? Are you there?" "I'm here, sweetheart. Look, why don't we talk about this tomorrow when you've had a chance to get some rest? These kinds of things usually have simple explanations." But his voice had changed. The warmth was still there, but underneath it was something I had never heard when talking to my father. Guilt. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, and hung up. As I drove through downtown Pinehaven, past the hardware store where Dad bought his electrical supplies and the diner where we used to have breakfast after church on Sundays, I tried to prepare myself for a conversation that would either restore my faith in my family or destroy it completely. The porch light was on when I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, and I could see Dad's silhouette in the living room window. He was waiting for me, just as he had waited up countless times during my teenage years when I was out with friends. But this time, I wasn't coming home with stories about school dances or part-time job adventures. This time, I was coming home to confront the possibility that the man who had taught me everything about integrity had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. The conversation that followed would reveal not just what had happened to my money, but what had been happening to my family for months while I was focused on building my future, completely unaware that the people I trusted most had been planning to steal it from me. The screen door creaked as I stepped onto the front porch of my childhood home. Through the window, I could see Dad pacing in the living room, running his hands through his graying hair the way he did when he was trying to solve a particularly challenging electrical problem. But this wasn't about faulty wiring or blown fuses. This was about trust, family, and the disappearance of 6 years of my life. He opened the door before I could knock, and for the first time in my adult life, my father couldn't meet my eyes. "Come on in, Natty," he said quietly, stepping aside. "We should sit down for this." The living room looked exactly as it had during my childhood. Mom's cross-stitched samplers on the walls, Dad's recliner positioned perfectly for watching the evening news, the coffee table still bearing ring stains from countless family game nights. But the familiar comfort of home felt hollow now, contaminated by the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. Dad settled into his recliner while I remained standing, my arms crossed defensively across my chest. "Where's my money, Dad?" He took a deep breath and finally looked at me. "Natty, I need you to understand something about family. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions to help the people we love." "That's not an answer," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. $47,000 doesn't just disappear. Someone took it from my account. Someone who knew my personal information. Raymond and Priscilla were about to lose their house. The bank was starting foreclosure proceedings. Bethany would have had nowhere to live. And you know how hard it is for Raymond to find steady work. The words hit me like a physical blow. "You gave my money to Uncle Raymond?" "I loaned it to them," Dad corrected, though his voice lacked conviction. "They're going to pay it back once Raymond gets his new job sorted out." I stared at him in disbelief. You stole $47,000 from me and gave it to Uncle Raymond, who has never successfully paid back a loan in his entire adult life? It wasn't stealing, Dad said, his voice rising slightly. Your family. Family helps family. Your Uncle Raymond has been there for this family through thick and thin. When? I demanded. When has Uncle Raymond been there for anyone? You've been supporting him financially for years, Dad. You paid for Bethany's car, covered their mortgage payments, helped with their bills. When exactly has Raymond helped us? Dad's jaw tightened. You don't understand the full situation, Natalie. The use of my full name instead of his usual Natty felt like another small betrayal. Then explain it to me. Explain how taking my life savings without permission isn't theft. Explain how you could look at 6 years of my hard work and decide Uncle Raymond deserved it more than I did. You don't need that money right now, Dad said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. You have a good job, a steady income, you're young and healthy. Raymond and Priscilla are in their 50s with no savings and no prospects. They needed help immediately. I needed that money for my house, I said, my voice breaking slightly. You knew that was my goal. You knew how hard I've worked for it. Houses can wait, Dad replied dismissively. Family emergencies can't. The casual dismissal of my dreams felt like a slap. How did you even access my account? Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I still had your information from when I helped you set up the account after nursing school. I thought you might have changed the security questions, but you always used the same answers. Mom's maiden name, the street we lived on when you were born. So you planned this, I said, the full scope of the betrayal becoming clear. You tested my security questions and then went to the bank and withdrew my money. It wasn't like that, Dad protested. Raymond came to me last month in tears. The foreclosure notice had arrived and they had 30 days to come up with the back payments or lose everything. I tried to help them work out a payment plan with the bank, but they needed a lump sum. I didn't have that kind of cash available. So you decided to take mine. I decided to help my brother using resources that would eventually benefit the whole family anyway, Dad said, his voice gaining strength as he convinced himself of his justification. You're going to inherit this house someday, and Raymond's house too, if we can save it. This was an investment in the family's future. I felt physically sick. Dad, do you hear yourself? You're talking about stealing my money like it was some kind of financial planning strategy. I'm talking about family loyalty, Dad snapped, standing up from his chair. Something your generation seems to have forgotten. When I was your age, we understood that individual success meant nothing if your family was struggling. When you were my age, you were building a business and saving for your own family's future. You didn't give away your livelihood to bail out relatives who made poor decisions.
Raymond's situation isn't his fault, Dad said. The economy is tough. Good jobs are hard to find. He's been trying to get back on his feet for years. For years, Dad? For years. And in all that time, what has he done to improve his situation? Has he gone back to school? Has he learned a trade? Has he taken any job that was beneath him? Or has he just waited for you to solve his problems? Dad's face reddened. That's a cruel way to talk about your uncle. It's an honest way to talk about him, I replied. And you know it's true. Uncle Raymond has spent his entire adult life expecting other people to rescue him from the consequences of his choices. Life isn't that simple, Natalie, Dad said. Not everyone has your advantages. My advantages? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What advantages? Working double shifts? Living in a studio apartment? Driving a car that's older than some of my patients? I created my own advantages through hard work and sacrifice. You had a stable home growing up, Dad said. You had parents who could afford to send you to college. You had opportunities Raymond never had. Uncle Raymond had the same opportunities you did, I pointed out. You both grew up in the same house, with the same parents, in the same town.
You chose to learn a trade and build a business. He chose to drift from job to job, hoping something would fall into his lap. Success isn't just about making good choices, Dad argued. Sometimes it's about luck, about being in the right place at the right time. And sometimes it's about taking responsibility for your own life instead of expecting your brother to steal from your daughter to solve your problems, I said. The words hung between us like a challenge. Dad's face went through several emotions: anger, hurt, and finally something that looked almost like shame. "I never meant for you to see it that way," he said quietly. "How else could I see it?" I asked. "You took my money without permission and gave it to someone who has never shown any indication that he'll pay it back. You violated my trust and my mother's memory." "Don't bring your mother into this," Dad warned. "Mom told me never to let anyone else control my financial future. She made me promise to always have my own money, my own plan. You know what she went through watching her mother struggle after her father left. She understood what financial independence meant to a woman. Your mother never had to choose between her child's dreams and her family's survival," Dad said. "Yes, she did," I replied firmly. "She chose my future over her own comfort every single day during those last months. She could have spent that money on experimental treatments or a luxury hospital room or a final vacation. Instead, she saved every penny she could because she wanted me to have opportunities she never had." Dad sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 62 years. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "For who?" I asked. "For Uncle Raymond, who gets to keep making poor financial decisions because he knows you'll always bail him out? For Bethany, who learns that she doesn't need to be responsible because family money will always be available? For Aunt Priscilla, who never has to confront the reality that her husband needs to grow up and take care of his own family?" "They're family," Dad said weakly. "So am I. I'm your daughter. I'm the one who visited every weekend, who helped you through Mom's death, who respected the values you taught me about hard work and integrity. But apparently Uncle Raymond's immediate needs matter more than my long-term dreams." Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I thought you would understand eventually. I thought once you saw how much we helped them, you'd realize it was the right thing to do." "Did you ask them what their plan was for paying me back?" I asked. Another pause. "Raymond says he's got a lead on a job with the county maintenance department. This same county job he's been about to get for the past 3 years. This time is different," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "What's the timeline for repayment?" "We didn't set specific dates," Dad admitted. "I figured we'd work that out once he gets settled in the new position." "So there's no plan. You gave away my life savings with no guarantee of repayment and no timeline for getting it back? Family doesn't work that way," Dad protested. "We don't put conditions on helping each other." "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe if you had put some conditions on your help over the years, Uncle Raymond would have learned to solve his own problems instead of creating bigger ones." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Through the window, I could see Uncle Raymond's beat-up sedan, followed by Aunt Priscilla's small SUV. My stomach dropped as I realized they probably had been called to come over for this confrontation. "Did you tell them I was coming?" I asked. Dad nodded reluctantly. "I thought it would be better if we all talked together, as a family." "As a family," I repeated bitterly. "The family that steals from each other."
The front door opened without a knock, and Uncle Raymond walked in, followed by Aunt Priscilla and Bethany. The casual way they entered my childhood home, as if they had every right to be there, as if they hadn't just participated in stealing my future, made my anger flare even hotter. "Natalie," Uncle Raymond said with forced cheerfulness, "Gerald told us you were having some concerns about the loan arrangement." "Loan arrangement?" I stared at him. "Is that what we're calling theft now?" "Now, hold on," Aunt Priscilla interjected. "Your father explained the situation to us. We never would have accepted help if we thought it would cause family problems." "You never would have accepted stolen money?" I asked pointedly. "It wasn't stolen," Bethany said, speaking for the first time.
Uncle Gerald offered to help us. We didn't force him to do anything. I looked at my cousin, noting her new designer purse and freshly done nails. Where exactly did you think $47,000 came from, Bethany? Did you think Dad just had that kind of cash lying around? We assumed it was from his business savings, Uncle Raymond said. Gerald has always been good with money. So good that he had to steal from his daughter to help you? I asked. Nobody stole anything, Uncle Raymond said, his voice rising. This is how families work, Natalie. We help each other through tough times. Your father understood that, even if you don't. This isn't help, I said. This is enabling. There's a difference. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Mom's old mantel clock. 5 people who shared blood and history, but who clearly had very different ideas about family, responsibility, and right and wrong. I realized that this conversation wasn't going to end with apologies or immediate repayment. It was going to end with me having to choose between accepting this betrayal as normal family dynamics or taking action to protect what remained of my financial future. The choice, unfortunately, had already been made for me. The silence in the room was broken by Uncle Raymond clearing his throat. Look, Natalie, I know this is hard for you to understand, but we're all family here. We stick together. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Nobody stole anything, Aunt Priscilla said defensively. Your father offered to help us. We never even knew it was your money specifically. I turned to stare at her. You didn't think to ask where a 62-year-old electrician got $47,000 in cash? Bethany shifted uncomfortably on the couch. We thought maybe he had been saving it, or maybe it was from a big job or something. For 3 weeks, you've been living in a house that was saved with my money and you never once wondered where it came from? I asked. We've been grateful, Uncle Raymond said. We plan to thank you properly once things settle down. Thank me? The absurdity of it was overwhelming. You planned to thank me for money that was stolen from me without my knowledge or consent? Dad finally spoke up. Natalie, I know you're upset, but let's try to work this out as a family. Raymond, maybe you could explain your repayment plan. Uncle Raymond exchanged glances with Aunt Priscilla before responding. Well, like I mentioned to Gerald, I'm expecting to hear back about that county position any day now. Once I start working steady again, we can work out a payment schedule. What county position exactly? I asked. Maintenance supervisor for the Parks Department. The interview went really well last month. Last month? I looked at Dad. You gave him my money based on an interview from a month ago? These things take time, Uncle Raymond said defensively. Government hiring moves slowly. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. The Pinehaven County Parks Department website shows that position was filled 3 weeks ago. The announcement is right here on their employment page. The color drained from Uncle Raymond's face. There might be other positions opening up soon. So there's no job. There's no income. There's no repayment plan. You just took my life savings and hoped something would work out eventually. Things will work out, Aunt Priscilla said quickly. Raymond is very resourceful. I laughed bitterly. Resourceful enough to convince my father to commit bank fraud, apparently? Bank fraud? Dad said sharply. Now you're being ridiculous. What would you call using someone else's personal information to access their account and withdraw their money without permission? I call it helping family during an emergency, Dad replied stubbornly. The legal system will call it fraud and theft. And that's exactly what I'm going to report it as if my money isn't returned immediately. The room went completely silent. Uncle Raymond's face went pale, and Aunt Priscilla grabbed his arm. Natalie, Dad said slowly, you're not seriously threatening to involve the police. I'm not threatening anything. I'm stating a fact. My money was stolen. If it's not returned, I will file a police report and press charges for theft and fraud. You would send your own father to jail Bethany asked incredulously. I would hold my father accountable for stealing from me, I corrected, just like he taught me to be accountable for my actions when I was growing up. Dad stood up abruptly. That's enough. You're talking nonsense now. Am I? I pulled up my banking app on my phone. Let me show everyone what we're really talking about here.
I turned the screen toward the room, showing my account balance of 0 and the withdrawal history. This account represented 6 years of working extra shifts, living below my means, and saving every possible dollar. 6 years of following the values you taught me about hard work and financial responsibility, Aunt Priscilla said, her voice rising. You've had everything handed to you. Handed to me? I stood up, my anger finally boiling over. I worked my way through nursing school. I live in a 500-square-foot apartment. I drive a car that's older than your daughter. I haven't taken a real vacation in 4 years. What exactly has been handed to me? You had parents who could support you, Bethany said. My mother died when I was 15, I said coldly. My father worked multiple jobs to keep us afloat while paying her medical bills. I got scholarships and student loans for college, worked part-time throughout nursing school, and have been supporting myself completely since graduation. The only thing I inherited from my parents was their work ethic. That's more than some people get, Uncle Raymond muttered. You got the same parents Dad did, I pointed out. The same opportunities to learn a trade, build a business, make something of yourself. The difference is, Dad worked for what he wanted while you waited for someone else to give it to him. Life isn't that simple, Aunt Priscilla said. It's exactly that simple, I replied. And Dad enabling your poor choices for decades is what led to this moment. Dad sat back down heavily. I was trying to help my brother. You were trying to avoid watching him face the consequences of his choices. And now you've made me pay the price for your inability to say no to him. I walked toward the door, then turned back to face the room. I want my money back, all of it, within 7 days. If it's not returned, I'm filing a police report. Natalie, wait, Dad called after me. 7 days, I repeated without turning around. I left them sitting in that living room and drove straight back to Millbrook, my mind racing with everything I needed to do. The first step was documenting everything while the details were fresh in my memory. Back in my apartment, I spent the next 3 hours writing down every detail of the conversation, every admission they had made, every excuse they had offered. I took screenshots of my banking history, the county website showing the filled position, and saved copies of all my account statements showing the years of study deposits. The next morning, I called in sick to work again and drove to Millbrook Community Bank headquarters. I requested a meeting with the fraud department and explained the situation to a detective named Officer Martinez, who specialized in financial crimes. Based on what you're telling me, Officer Martinez said after reviewing my documentation, this appears to be a clear case of unauthorized access to your account. The fact that your father used your personal information to withdraw the money without your knowledge or consent constitutes theft, regardless of his claimed intentions. What are my options? I asked. You can file a formal police report, which would trigger an investigation. The bank would also conduct their own investigation and would likely reverse the transaction while the case is pending. However, I should warn you that prosecuting a family member can have serious legal and personal consequences. What kind of consequences? Your father could face charges for theft and fraud. Depending on the amount and circumstances, he could be looking at significant fines and possible jail time. It would also likely destroy your family relationships permanently. I sat quietly for a moment, weighing my options. What happens if I don't file a report? Then this becomes a civil matter between you and your family. You could pursue legal action to recover the money, but it would be more complicated and expensive. How long do I have to decide? There's no legal deadline for filing a theft report, but the sooner you act, the stronger your case will be. Banks are also more likely to reverse transactions quickly if fraud is reported promptly. I thanked Officer Martinez and left the bank with a fraud report form and 7 days to decide whether to destroy my family in order to save my future. That afternoon, I called my supervisor at Riverside Medical and requested a week of personal leave.
I needed time to think clearly without the stress of work, and I wanted to research my options thoroughly before making any decisions. I spent the next 2 days calling legal aid societies, researching theft and fraud laws, and trying to understand exactly what I was facing. The reality was stark. Either I accepted the loss of my life savings and enabled my family's dysfunction to continue, or I took legal action that would likely send my father to jail and destroy every relationship I had in Pinehaven.
Ms. Westbrook, this is Janet Coleman from Millbrook Community Bank's Security Department. We need to speak with you about some irregularities we've discovered regarding your account. My heart rate spiked. What kind of irregularities?
I'd prefer to discuss this in person, she said. Would you be able to come in this afternoon?
Of course. Is this about the unauthorized withdrawal?
Among other things, she said cryptically. Please bring identification and any documentation you have regarding the incident.
I arrived at the bank an hour later to find Janet Coleman waiting with 2 other people, a bank security officer and someone who introduced himself as a federal banking investigator. Ms. Westbrook, Janet said, we've been conducting a review of your account activity and we've discovered some concerning patterns that extend beyond the single withdrawal you reported. She opened a file folder and spread several documents across the desk. It appears your account has been accessed multiple times over the past 8 months by someone using your credentials. Small amounts were transferred out and then returned, possibly to test whether you would notice the activity. I stared at the papers showing transactions I had never made. I never authorized any of these transfers. We believe someone was monitoring your account balance and spending patterns, the federal investigator said. This suggests a more sophisticated operation than a single desperate act by a family member. What do you mean? Janet pulled out another document. The withdrawal that emptied your account was made using a duplicate debit card that was created 3 weeks before the actual theft. Someone had been planning this for months. My hands started shaking as the implications sank in. You're saying this wasn't a spontaneous decision to help my uncle? The evidence suggests this was a carefully planned theft, the investigator said, and based on the sophistication of the methods used, we believe your father may have had help from someone with knowledge of banking systems. They showed me security footage from the bank, grainy but clear enough to show Dad at the teller window. But in the background, barely visible, was another figure I recognized. Bethany was sitting in the bank's waiting area, watching as my father drained my account. We'd like you to file a formal complaint, Janet said. This case may be part of a larger pattern of fraud we've been investigating. I looked at the evidence spread across the desk. Months of unauthorized access, a duplicate card, security footage showing premeditation. This wasn't family helping family. This was an elaborate theft that had been planned and executed over months. The betrayal was so much deeper than I had imagined. Yes, I said finally. I want to file a formal complaint. I want to press charges. As I signed the paperwork, I realized that the phone call I had been promised in the opening of this story was about to come. The bank manager had mentioned they would be conducting a full investigation, and something told me they were going to uncover secrets that would make the stolen money seem like the least of my problems. My family hadn't just stolen my savings, they had been systematically robbing me for months, and now I was about to discover exactly how deep their deception really went. 2 days after filing the formal complaint, I was working a shift at Riverside Medical when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Millbrook Community Bank, and my heart immediately started racing. Ms. Westbrook, this is Janet Coleman from Bank Security. We need you to come in immediately. We've discovered something significant during our investigation that you need to see. I arranged coverage for my patients and drove straight to the bank, my mind spinning with possibilities. What could be more significant than the months of unauthorized access they had already shown me? Janet met me at the entrance with the same federal investigator from our previous meeting. Ms. Westbrook, what I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to process. We've uncovered evidence that this fraud extends far beyond your personal account. They led me to a private conference room where multiple computer screens displayed banking records, transaction histories, and surveillance footage. During our investigation of your case, we discovered that your father and cousin have been running a sophisticated fraud operation targeting multiple family members and community members. The investigator pulled up a series of bank records. Gerald Westbrook has been using his reputation as a trusted electrician to gain access to personal information from elderly clients. He would offer to help them set up online banking or assist with financial management, then use that access to make small withdrawals that were unlikely to be noticed. I stared at the screen showing dozens of accounts. How many people? 43 victims over the past 2 years, mostly elderly residents of Pinehaven who trusted your father implicitly. The individual amounts were small, usually between $50 and $200, but the total is approaching $300,000. My legs gave out and I had to sit down. $300,000? Your cousin Bethany was the technical specialist, the investigator continued. She has skills in computer programming that she's been using to create duplicate cards and bypass security systems. The sophistication of their operations suggests she's been planning this for years.
They showed me security footage from multiple bank branches showing Dad making withdrawals from different accounts, always with Bethany waiting nearby with a laptop. In some footage, she was clearly coaching him through earpiece communications. But why my account? I asked weakly. Why take everything from me when they were already stealing from so many others? Janet pulled up another screen. Because your account was the largest single target, and because they needed a significant amount quickly, we believe they were planning to disappear. Disappear? 3 days after your account was emptied, Bethany purchased 3 one-way tickets to Costa Rica, the investigator said. She, your Uncle Raymond, and your Aunt Priscilla were scheduled to fly out next week. The room started spinning. They were going to leave the country? The foreclosure story was completely fabricated, Janet explained. Your uncle's house was never in danger. They needed a cover story to explain the large withdrawal from your account. They've been living off their theft proceeds for months while planning their exit strategy. I felt physically sick. What about my dad? Was he going with them? The investigator's expression grew even more serious. Miss Westbrook, we believe your father was planning to frame you for the thefts. Frame me? How? We found documents on Bethany's computer showing that they had created false evidence suggesting you were the one with access to the victim accounts. They were going to claim that you used your healthcare worker position to gain trust with elderly patients, then exploited that trust to steal from them for years. Janet handed me a printed email. This is a draft report your father was preparing to send to local law enforcement, claiming he had discovered evidence that you were stealing from patients and community members. He was going to present himself as the concerned father who uncovered his daughter's crimes. I read the document in horror. It detailed how I had allegedly used my nursing credentials to gain access to patient homes, how I had convinced elderly residents to share their banking information, and how I had been systematically stealing from them for years. The evidence was fabricated but convincing. Fake screenshots, forged documents, and detailed timelines that painted me as a calculated predator. They were going to destroy my life and career to cover their own crimes. The plan was elegant in its cruelty, the investigator said grimly. By the time law enforcement finished investigating the false charges against you, they would have been safely in Costa Rica with nearly $500,000 in stolen money. $500,000? Your account was the final piece, Janet explained. They needed that money to complete their exit fund. When you threatened to involve police, they accelerated their timeline. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. This wasn't just about family helping family or poor financial decisions. This was a calculated, long-term criminal enterprise that was designed to destroy my life while enriching theirs. What happens now? I asked.
We've issued arrest warrants for all 4 conspirators. Your father, uncle, aunt, and cousin are all facing federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The evidence is overwhelming. All 4? Your Uncle Raymond wasn't just a victim of his own poor planning. He was the recruitment specialist. He identified potential targets through his wife's job at the grocery store and his connections in the community. This was a family business. Over the following days, the arrests made front-page news in the Pinehaven Herald. The trusted electrician who had wired half the town, the friendly grocery store clerk who knew everyone's business, and their family members were revealed to be sophisticated criminals who had been systematically robbing their neighbors for years. The community was devastated. People I had known since childhood called me to apologize for doubting the charges, to share their own experiences of suspicious account activity, and to express their shock that the Westbrook family could have fallen so far. Mrs. Henderson, our former neighbor whose garden gnome I had broken as a child, called me in tears. She said, "Your father helped me set up my online banking last year. I thought he was being so kind. I never imagined he was stealing from me." The investigation revealed that Dad's helpful nature had been a cover for gathering information. When he offered to assist elderly residents with their electrical problems, he was actually photographing important documents, noting computer passwords written on sticky notes, and collecting the personal information needed to access their accounts later. Bethany's social media posts took on a sinister new meaning when viewed through the lens of the investigation. Her expensive purchases, her designer clothes, her frequent trips, all funded by stealing from elderly residents who trusted her grandfather's reputation and her father's friendly demeanor. The legal proceedings moved quickly due to the overwhelming evidence. Dad, Uncle Raymond, Aunt Priscilla, and Bethany all pled guilty to avoid lengthy federal trials. Dad received 8 years in federal prison, Uncle Raymond got 6 years, Aunt Priscilla received 4 years, and Bethany, despite being the technical mastermind, received 12 years due to the sophistication of her crimes and her role in planning to frame me. The bank recovered most of my money through their fraud insurance, and restitution orders were put in place to help the other victims recover their losses.
The emotional impact was far more complex. I had to confront the reality that my father, the man who had taught me about integrity and hard work, had been planning to destroy my life to cover his crimes. The family values I had believed in were revealed to be an elaborate facade covering years of systematic theft and deception. But in the aftermath, I also discovered something unexpected about myself and my community. The other victims of the fraud reached out to me, not with blame or anger, but with gratitude for having the courage to report the crimes. Many of them had noticed small discrepancies in their accounts, but had dismissed them out of trust for the Westbrook family reputation. "You saved us from years more of this," Mrs. Henderson told me. "Your strength gave the rest of us permission to speak the truth." I used the recovered money plus the additional funds from restitution to finally buy my house. A small craftsman bungalow with a garden where I planted Mom's favorite roses. But more importantly, I used the experience to volunteer with elder abuse prevention programs and financial literacy organizations. Working with other fraud victims taught me that betrayal by trusted family members is more common than most people realize. The shame and confusion that comes with being victimized by someone you love often prevents people from seeking help or reporting crimes. 6 months after the arrests, I received a letter from Dad in federal prison. It was full of excuses, justifications, and requests for forgiveness that showed he still didn't understand the magnitude of what he had done. He insisted that he had never intended for me to be seriously hurt by their plan, that framing me was just meant to be temporary until they could get established in Costa Rica. I never responded to that letter or any that followed. The hardest part wasn't losing the money or even learning about the theft. The hardest part was accepting that the man who had raised me to value honesty and integrity had been living a lie for years. The values he had taught me were real, but his commitment to them was not. But that realization also freed me in unexpected ways.
I stopped feeling obligated to maintain relationships with people whose actions didn't match their words. I learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, instead of dismissing concerns out of family loyalty. Most importantly, I learned that true family isn't defined by blood relationships or shared history. True family consists of people who support your dreams instead of stealing them, who protect your future instead of threatening it, and who earn your trust through consistent actions rather than demanding it through guilt or obligation. Today, my family includes my chosen community of colleagues, friends, and neighbors who have shown me what real loyalty and support look like. We help each other through difficult times without keeping score, we celebrate each other's successes without resentment, and we build each other up instead of tearing each other down.